Well, Wesley, are you ready?
I'm ready whenever.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and start. I know there'll be some more coming in. But again, I want to thank this is Patrick Davis. If you haven't been on the last two Tuesday nights that we've done this, but this is my name's Patrick Davis. I work as a regional livestock field specialist out of Stockton, and Andy
Make sure that's on
McCorkle,
mute all the time, okay?
he'll be coming on here pretty soon.
Means I can't hear you.
I can hear him.
I said that means they can't hear you when it's on mute.
Okay. Oh,
And so Andy McCorkle, he's a regional livestock field specialist out of Lebanon, and he'll be on here in a little while. He had another meeting this evening, but he's going to be presenting later in the night. And then Wesley Tucker, who's going to start us off, is going to, he's our ag business specialist out of Bolivar, and he's going to kind of talk about raising versus basically tonight's talks about stocker cattle winter feeding. And as part of that, one of the things that you need to think about as we're weaning calves, weaning our spring calves, is do we direct sell those calves or do we retain ownership on those calves? And Wesley's going to talk a little bit about the economics related to that and possibly the economics related to stocker operations in general. And so he's going to start off with that. And then I'm going to come in and talk a little bit about nutrition related to stocker cattle and growing cattle. And then Andy's going to end up talking about vaccinations and implants and some other stuff related to stocker cattle. And so one of the things that, because Wesley kind of started this last meeting, but one of the things, there's a little chat thing down there at the bottom, and that's where we'd like for you to, if you've got questions or anything, that's where we would like for you to put those questions is in the chat. And throughout the night, if you've got questions, and put those in the chat, and you can, and then we'll answer them as we get them. But one of the things, so you know where the chat is. One of the things that I'd like for you to do, because during my talk, we're going to talk about optimum gain of stockers, and I'll kind of go through some of that a little bit. There's not a whole lot to that, but I just kind of wondered what if you'd put in the chat question wise or something, as far as what do you think in a stocker operation, what do you think your optimum gain of those calves should be, and what's the most important thing that you get, what do you actually get paid for in a stocker operation? And so if you would put that in the chat, we'll kind of discuss that further during my talk. So with that, and when I mean optimum gain, I mean optimum average daily gain of those calves. So with that, Wesley, if you want to go ahead and start, we'll just go ahead and start.
Yeah, appreciate it, Patrick. And, you know, I want to really encourage you, as Patrick said, to put questions in the chat. And if you have something that you don't understand what I'm saying, so that way put it in the chat, and he'll be monitoring that and can interrupt me. We kind of had a little bit of a mix up. So we kind of had the same topic listed for me for both last week and this week a little bit. Last week, we talked about the replacement heifers, but also some of the economics of weaning calves. But I said, that's kind of okay, because I really didn't get time last week to really slow down and talk about the differences of where I wanted to talk about the market differences. So you're going to see some of the same slides. Again, we've introduced ourselves the last few weeks. You're going to see some of the same slides. And for anyone that's new that wasn't on last week, I apologize, because I'll be slipping over these really, really fast. But I want to go more in depth into the kind of the discussion that we started last week. Again, anyone that's seen me give any kind of presentation that deals with the economics in a forage-based system, this right here is your cool season growth curve. And I say this is probably the greatest challenge that we have for profitability in Southwest Missouri. Unfortunately, we don't grow the same amount of grass every day of the year. But yet we have the same number of animals typically to feed. And so that is our challenge and how we deal with that. If you look at, this is the prices of different weight categories of calves, the blue line being the 3 to 4 weights, all the way up to the green line is the heavy weights, the 8 to 9 weights. Prices tend to follow in conjunction with one another. This is, I think, 15 years worth of data that I've plotted here, but yet they take different twists and different gaps in between them. And that is where your marketing opportunities really begin to show up. And that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about tonight. So I introduced this last week. You know, if you've got a 500-pound calf that's worth $2 a pound and you're going to put 100 pounds on and sell it for 600 pounds at $1.80, you know, you don't get the $2 a pound that you could sell it today. You don't get the $1.80 that you actually sell the calf at. You actually get 80 cents. Is what that calf, you know, $80 is what that calf actually goes up in value. And that is, so 80 cents a pound is the value of gain. And a lot of producers don't understand that. They get the idea in their head that, well, calves are selling for $1.80. So that means every pound I put on is another $1.80 in my pocket. No, it's not. They have something called a price slide, or that gap in between those different weight categories. This is always going to be influenced by a lot of things, but the biggest one is that last one right there, the cost of gain, meaning mainly the price of corn, because that is what determines the cost in the feedlot. So, you know, if you think about it, this spring I was doing a backgrounding workshop online, and at that time I pulled the weekly market summary, and the difference between a heavy 5 weight and a heavy 6 weight was 67 cents a pound. Now, ironically, I pulled this last week, and right now the difference between a 5 weight and a 6 weight is about $1.24 a pound. So the market is actually paying more for those heavier calves right now than they are the lighter ones. And we're going to talk a little bit here in a little bit why that is, why the market might value heavier calves right now. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with when that calf is going to be slaughtered for harvest, because that has a big influence on it. So how do buyers, and apologize, I'll cough and take drinks and waller around on this cough drop in my mouth. I've got kind of the crud going on here. Don't worry, it's not COVID, but I've got one of those head colds going on. So, you know, how do buyers value cattle whenever they look at the difference between a 3 weight and a 4 weight and a 4 weight and a 5 weight? How do they decide, you know, what price they can pay for those? Well, they decide based on 2 things: the expected sale price that they'll get for that calf whenever they're done with it, and what it's going to cost them to get there. The markets are efficient. Those two things determine everything, essentially. So if you think about it, these are some old slides that I put together whenever I was first starting with Extension many years ago. But at that time, you'll see that when you see the prices. But in the middle of November, June live cattle were at 85 cents a pound. And I was thankful that we had never gotten back close to that until just recently. We actually did, didn't we? When we got down below $1 a pound. But June live cattle were 85 cents a pound. So a 1,300 pound steer at 85 cents a pound was $1,100. And if the cost of gain was 69 cents a pound at that time, that means taking a 600-pound steer and adding 700 pounds to him would cost $483. That's 700 pounds times 69 cents. So the $1,100 he's going to be worth at the end, minus the $483 it's going to cost me to get him there, would be $622. So 622 divided by 600 meant I could pay $1.04 for that calf and be break even. Anyone want to take a guess in the middle of November what 600-pound steers were bringing that week? $1.03. Couple weeks later, another example. At the end of November, Nebraska markets at that time, a 750 pound calf was bringing 99 cents a pound or $743. A 550 pound calf was bringing $1.09 or $600. So I take that 743 minus the 600. That's $143 a head. He goes up in value. 200 pounds a gain. 71.5 cents is my value of gain. Anyone want to take a guess what DTN was saying the feedlot cost of gain was 2 weeks later than the previous one I just did? 71 cents. Markets are efficient and cattle buyers are notorious for what we call betting on the come, betting on that markets are going to be better by the time they get there than they are right now. And so they tend to bid away any profit margin based off of what they think, hoping the market's going to be better and based on the current cost of gain. This statement right here, this quote by Pete Bonds, who was the Stalker of the Year winner a few years ago, to me, it explains everything. It's the margin between what the cattle cost and what it cost you to put the gain on them and what you'll eventually sell them for. He said, this isn't rocket science. It's third grade math. And he's exactly right. The whole idea of whether I can make money growing my calves bigger is simply, what are they worth today? What are they going to be worth whenever I'm ready to sell them? And what is it going to cost me to get them from where they are today to where I want to get them at? So when you think about, I said I started with extension in May of 01. So that was right after the turn of the century. So if you looked at the last 10 years in the previous century, you know, calves had very, very consistent price pattern on the different categories. The black line being the 3 to 4 weights, the green line being the 4 to 5, the red being the 5 to 6, and on and on. So calves peaked with grass fever in the spring and were the lowest in the fall. Well, why would that be? Well, you know, you just think about it. People typically wanted to put gain on calves on when the grass came up. They bought calves to turn out on grass, and they got worth less and less as we went throughout the summer until the fall, when something else was happening, when everyone tended to wean their calves. At that time, we had very few fall calving herds. So pretty much all of our calves were weaned in the fall. And so they had all winter long to go somewhere before they went into the feedlot or go straight into the feedlot. Well, when you get to the fall of the year and you run out of grass, what happens to the cost of gain? The cost of gain goes up. It's going to be more expensive, right? So we could take the differences between these lines and we could put them into a numerical format. So when you go back and look at these slides, which Patrick is going to send out, he may do it while we're on this call. I sent him tonight's PowerPoint as well as last week's PowerPoint. So he's going to send those out to you. But the way you read this is, if I'm starting with a 450 pound calf in the month of January, and I'm going to put 100 pounds on him and sell him 2 months later as a 450 pound calf, the market has typically paid me 74 cents a pound for that. Well, let's back up here and look at that. A 450 pound calf in the month of January, and I'm going to put 100 pounds on him and sell him as a 550, which is the red line. 2 months later, look, my price slide is fairly flat. Versus if I start with that same 450 pound calf, now I start with him in April and sell him 2 months later in June, the market only pays me 37 cents, or essentially basically half. And you say, well, how can that be? Why does the value of gain go in half? Well, let's just back up and look. Now I start with that same 450 pound calf in the month of April, and now I'm going to sell him as a 550, or the red bar, 2 months later. Look how steep that price slide is. Look how much his value of gain has dropped. The steeper the price slide, the more the value of gain gets less. It gets smaller. Okay. Alternatively, I remember selling 850 pound calves one year, sitting in the auction barn, selling 850 pound calves for $1.25. That same day, I watched all kinds of calves sell for 500 pound calves for $1.25. A 500 was bringing $1.25. An 800 pounder was bringing $1.25. That essentially was a flat price slide, or a very good value of gain. Why was that? That happened to be 2012, when corn was very, very expensive, so the cost of gain was high. All right. So when we think about that, this is just taking that chart and putting it in a graph form. You think about that, again, the value of gain typically is often worth less in the summer because that's when the cost of gain is cheaper versus you get to the winter months when the cost of gain is a lot higher. And so the value of gain has to be higher as well. And if you think about this was, when I started, we spent a lot of time talking about how can we use our forage program to extend our grazing, not to where we just have grass during the summer months, but where we extend our grass into the fall and maybe even stockpile for winter months to be able to take advantage of some of these times that the market wants to pay me more to put gain on. Can I do it less than the cost? Again, as Pete Bond said, it's third grade math. Can I do it cheaper than the feedlot can? If I can do it cheaper than the feedlot can, I can make money at this. If I cannot do it cheaper than the feedlot can, markets are efficient and I'm probably just better off to sell today because the market price more than likely is going to be better today than if I go into the market if my cost of gain is going to be higher. Okay. Let's flash forward another 10 years. So this is 2000 to 2010. The prices look a little bit different, don't they? Yes, the lighter weight calves get highest in the spring and they are lowest in the fall. But look, it's not a steady decline like it was the previous 10 years. They're more flat. They're more flat throughout the summer months until you get to the fall and all of a sudden have this big drop off. The heavier weight calves are still fairly, they're the cheapest in the spring, winter, spring, and then steadily increase into the fall. But these in the middle, the 550s and the 650s kind of get some interesting patterns here. And one of the things I mentioned earlier, I was going to give you a hint. Why would I think I've got a graph here. Why would a heavyweight calf, this is just showing the versus the average price for the year. Why would a heavyweight calf be worth the most in the fall, but not any later, not late fall, but early fall? Well, my master's thesis was all on retained ownership strategies. And you know what? Just go look at the futures market and look at the difference between the value of a calf that gets harvested for slaughter in April versus June. And so when we start talking about going into grilling season, there's a huge, that calf probably drops $10 to $15 a hundredweight just from April to June the following summer. So getting that heavyweight calf into the feedlot while he's still got time to make choice by the following April is extremely valuable. All right. But if you think about it, so we take these different price patterns here and we plot the value of gain from those. So this is just taking the value of going from the blue line to the red line and from the red line to the green line, adding an additional 100 pounds and selling those calves later. And if you look at it, because we were much more flat early on in the summer, the value of gain stayed stronger through most of the summer until we got to the dog days of summer and then that July, August period, because we look at how hard they start dropping off after the 1st of September, the values of gain didn't end up paying us very well, paid us very poorly, actually, down here around 40 to 45 cents for additional gain versus the market paying up to $1 just a few months earlier. So we kind of started looking at this and how this has affected our strategies. I use this to I'm going to tell you a crazy thing. Wesley Tucker's one of those nutcases that I quit calving in February from, Valentine's Day to April 15th. That's a typical spring, or whether you want to call it winter calving, whatever you want to call it. Valentine's Day to tax day is when a lot of people calve. Looking at these prices, I said, hey, I've got to have every calf on the ground by Christmas so that I can have them marketed by the end of August before this thing starts happening. Other thing that this caused is we went to a lot more fall calving and some different things like that to try to get around some of this late summer really hard drop in prices. But again, we get into those winter months, the market tend to pay better. But look, it didn't pay that much better in the winter months now than it did the previous previous spring and throughout the early part of the summer. So I know I can put that gain on from March through June cheaper than I can from November to January. So this changed the way we did some of those type things of when I wanted to have those calves there and how much weight I wanted to put on them. I also mentioned last week, don't get lulled into thinking just because Wesley Tucker says this looks like a good strategy that this is always going to work. Realize there are going to be wide price swings. You know, I mentioned the case of BSE in December of 2003 that caused our value of gain to go to almost negative 50 cents. Same thing happened in the early fall of 06. We had the ethanol boom taken off and found out our corn yields weren't near as good as we thought they were, and there wasn't enough corn out there, and our yields went to almost negative 70 cents. But then you know what? Just a few months later, they were all the way up to almost $1.50. So the value of gain can change very, very quickly with the market. Okay. That's what we economists like to call exogenous variables. So this was a quote, and I don't remember, I was reading this in an article and I didn't write down who had said it, but they talking about the stocker business. And they said, you got to realize that you can make money 5 years in a row and then you can lose it all in the 6th. Okay. So how you think about your prices and how you protect that price risk becomes really important, because a lot of us are small scale livestock producers and we don't have the size ability to take some of the locking in of prices that someone that has larger quantities can. And we're going to talk about this again a little bit later. Okay. But if you look to the jump to the next 10 years, so the last 10 years, basically from 2010 to 2019, and look at how this has kind of changed. Remember, those lighter weight calves were being much more flat throughout most of the summer. Well, now we started getting some, yes, they're peaking in the spring and going down through the summer, but they went down much more steadily in early summer now, and actually got a little bit of a bounce back in late summer, and not that hard dip in the fall. And some of this is, as I said, a lot of people have moved away from spring calving. Some more people are doing fall calving, but also the what we're looking for in calves and what weight category calves that we're wanting to put in the feedlot is changing. You know, the idea of whenever I got out of college 20 years ago, 550 pound calf, and a lot of times he would go straight into the feedlot. Well, now we've started creating more of a system of more people backgrounding calves, more people growing them bigger, and it might not be I that's doing that, but somebody's growing that calf bigger a lot of times before he goes into the feedlot. But look what has happened. Remember earlier it was those lightweight calves that had a fairly flat pattern. Now look at the yellow bar, which is the 600 to 700 pound calf. Look how flat that calf is all throughout the summer months, all the way to fall, versus the blue is still, it's flatter than it was, but it's still has some incline. But now the green bar, being the 8 to 9 weight that we weren't even talking about 20 years ago as a calf that wasn't in the feedlot, now that 8 to 9 weight is steadily increasing. And so our middleweight calves are coming more of that kind of flat price pattern, and our heavier weights are still having that increase up. And you know, this has some things to affect the market for us. For instance, I was thinking back to this summer when I sold my fall-born calves. I had weaned them, backgrounded them for a while. And when I went to sell those calves, I remember, and I'm going to say these off the top of my head, I should have thrown them in here, but I believe if they were going to weigh 550, I was bid 165. If they were going to weigh 600, I was bid 155. If they were going to weigh 650, I think I was bid 145. And if they got up to 670, they were going to be $1.40. So basically they dropped 15 cents a pound, going from a 600 pound calf to a 675 pound calf. Why was that? They really don't want those 650 to 700 pound calves. They're kind of in that in-between range. They're too heavy really to go out into a good grass-based grazing program a lot of time. They won't gain quite as well. But you know, they're just not quite big enough of what they really want to go into the feedlot. So essentially, my calf only went up $12 $12 a head, going from 600 to 675 pound. Alternatively, what the market really was telling me to do, looking at this blue line, was to just hold on and keep that 650 or 675 pound calf and sell him a couple months later as a heavy 7 weight. That's what the market really wanted me to do. Back to my thing of the idea that later in the fall, the market really would have valued that to be able to get him ready to go for harvesting by the next April. So this is what I'm kind of talking about, learning to allow the market to tell you what they really want. But if I looked at those value of gains for 2010 to 2019, if I looked at those, it's no longer that 60 to 70 to 80 cents I was talking about. The market has been paying me much higher in the last decade. Well, you think about it, corn's been a lot higher the last decade, hasn't it? It really has. I'm going to slide through a couple of these slides to show this. You know, if I think about it, the cost of a steer cost of gain in the feedlot from 2000 to 2009 was basically 60 cents. That gain from 2010 to 2009, the cost of that gain was 90 cents. So it went up a third. So if I think about it, that's why my value of gain has also went up by about a third. But look at these lighter weight categories. To go from a 350 to a 450 or 450 to 550, the market has paid me $1.54 to put 100 pounds on a 350 pound calf. Market's paying me $1.20 to put 100 pounds on a 450 pound calf. And when I first saw this, how I calculated this was saying starting in the month of January, and then selling that calf 2 months later, this is what the market's paid me. And I said, wow, those are numbers almost seem like I calculated something wrong. So I went back and just looked at the average 10-year price for a 350 pound calf was 700. The average price of a 450 pound calf was 857. And the prices are right in line. Although, ironically, prices on the same day, the value of gain is not quite as high as even selling 2 months later. So the market of selling that calf worth 100 pounds additional 2 months later is actually paying me more than the price differences of those calves in any one given year. All right. So just thinking about that, thinking about the value of gain for those lighter weight calves, how much higher that is, I think this has real applications for producers right here and now, even coming into this time of weaning. We all have cows in our herd that just aren't quite cutting it. So they're just not quite cutting, just not quite making the cut of raising those calves like they should be. So if you think about that, if you think about those cows that are just not raising the calves as much as the better calves, sometimes pulling those calves off there and getting rid of those cows and putting those calves on feed can put gains on them and bring them back up to be able to sell with the rest. I mean, alternatively, we wait till weaning time and then we take them all in and we sell those dinks. Okay. Now some calves are just dinks and are not going to perform, but there's a lot of calves that are dinks it's not their fault. It's the fault of their mother. If we can pull those calves in and put them on some additional grain, and I did that this year. I'd saved some heifers out of a bull that unfortunately he turned out to be a terminal sire. His heifers just were not milkers. The calves weren't doing good. I had some extra twins. I had some extra calves out there that weren't supposed to be. I went ahead and weaned them calves off there 100 days before I weaned the rest of them. Oh, it probably wasn't 100 days. It was probably like 60 or 70 days. I probably got them off 2 months early, but I pulled them calves in 2 months early and I put them on feed and did just exactly what Patrick and Andy are going to talk to you about tonight. I didn't play around with them. I put the feed in front of them and I made them gain. And you know what? Those calves ended up selling right along with the other calves that they were so far behind, not very much earlier. And I got a whole lot better price for them calves than if I hadn't have. But thinking about this value of gain and how important it is for these lighter weight calves, I think is a real opportunity for us. So if you think about it, the orange bar is that value of gain for the different weight categories from 2000 to 2009. The blue is from 2010 to 2019. So it's the last 10 years. It's higher, but as I said, I've already showed you the cost of gains about a third higher, so it should be. But wait till you look at this. So again, the blue bar is another previous period. It's from 2005 to 2010. The orange bar is from 2011 to 2014, and the gray bars are from 2015 to 2018. Well, okay, the orange bars are all higher than the blue, and the gray bars are just as high. So we all know that feed got high in 2011 to 2014, right? So the value of gain had to go up, all right? But in the gray bars from 2015 to 2018, corn price dropped back down. See, for the blue bars, corn price was 338. For the orange bars, corn price was 598. But in the gray bars, corn went back down to 344, but our values of gain stayed up. And even for the lighter weight categories, for the 350s and the 450s, actually even continued to increase. What does this mean? Why is this? I think we're getting some structural shifts in our beef industry. I really do. Feedlots I have a lot of pressure under them, and they're tending to change. They're, one pen rider maybe used to cover 2 or 3,000 head. Now one pen rider is covering 20,000 head of calves. They want a different calf going into the feedlot today than they did 10 years ago. They really do. And they are valuing that weaning and those preconditioning programs. We can all say whether the market's paying you for that or not, they want a different calf today than they did before. And I also think those high priced times of 2011 and 2014, when they had to give $1,500 or $2,000 for a calf, took him into the feedlot and he died because he wasn't weaned or given his shots at home, broke them of some of that. And so they're willing to pay us more to put that gain on out here on our grass. So if I think about those price patterns and how that affects me, yes, they're all higher. All the values of gain are higher now, and we hope they stay there. Yes, they're probably cheaper during the summer, but look at how quickly in the fall that value of gain starts back up and how well it holds in the winter months. Okay. So if I think about this, and I think especially about those lighter weight calves, can I do something to put that gain on them cheaper than the market can? Now, Finbin out of the University of Minnesota is a record keeping site that a lot of states send records to. We have a certain number of producers in Missouri that send their records to it, and it allows you to do benchmarking. So I went out this afternoon preparing this for this presentation and ran some reports. And I ran the last 10 years worth of records. And I know these numbers are small, but you'll get them on the handouts and you can look at them. The last 10 years worth of records for the average cow-calf producer, what they made. Their net return over labor and management was $50.34. Okay. But if you look across there, so you say, well, that's not too bad. We're making $50 a cow. That's not too bad. But if you look over there in 2014, we made $499 a cow. So that tends to affect that average a little bit. So I said, well, let's do an Olympic average. Let's throw out the best year, which was 2014, and the worst year, which ironically was last year, 2019. So let's throw out 2019 and 2014. That drops from $50 a cow to $14.61 a cow. Ouch. That's kind of rough. I ran the same report for backgrounding herds, herds that backgrounded calves, essentially taking them from 500 pounds to 700 pounds, not even looking at the lighter weights that I think have some real potential, but taking calves from 500 pounds to 700 pounds. Over that same 10-year time period, they averaged $42. And I said, well, I got to be fair. Let's throw out the high and the low for them and do the Olympic average. It essentially stays the same, $40. So basically, about 120 days, in about 120 days, they put 200 pounds on a calf and made $40. And we fed a cow on 3 acres for 365 days and made 16. Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about premiums last week. I'm not going to spend time on this because we talked about it. We can all debate whether the market is paying premiums or not. I will tell you it is. I will tell you it's really easy to sit in the sale barn and see another pen of cattle that were not weaned bring just as much as your calves that are weaned. But I will also tell you I'm not a cattle buyer, and I cannot judge the difference in quality of cattle. I always, of course, think mine are the best, but inevitably I will see a pen of calves that brings more than mine and say, why did they? And then I'll see another pen of calves that I think aren't that bad that are just discounted really bad. So the market is paying premiums. As we mentioned last week, the Oklahoma Quality Beef Network was showing the premiums for 4 to 5 weight steers about $20, for heifers 4 to 5 weights about $12.91. So a decent premium for doing that. There is value added. There's no doubt about it. I believe there's value added by getting those calves lined out at home. My only question is, do you capture it? And sometimes if you just run the calves in there and say, well, they've had their shots, and the guy says, yeah, weaned and shots, and no one really knows what that means, they may not bring more. All right. But if the buyer truly knows they're more, he will pay more for that. But oftentimes we don't capture that because we don't do the marketing on the front end. I think Andy's going to show this again, but I raised the idea of this. They talked about the money that they made from preconditioning, with 63% of that profit being additional calves weight sold. So again, I think I've highlighted, it's not just, can I make money on a premium, but can I make money from the value of gain from the additional weight category? Okay. The biggest stumbling block and the biggest problem I see to this is, as we said, 2/3 of our beef producers are over the age of 55. Often, a lot of them don't have the facilities. I mean, I rent farms, and you know what? I can run cows on very poor fences a lot of times. I can't wean in background calves on those same farms. I've got to have a different set of facilities. So, often we aren't set up for doing this, but I'm going to tell you, our industry is changing this way, and somebody's going to fill that void. The feedlot, I think, is proving to me by the value of gains that they're paying, that they want an 800-pound calf going into the feedlot, not a 550 balling calf. They don't want that calf being put on a semi truck, hauled 800 pounds, and then thrown in with 50,000 other ones. Again, our income source, from farming is not our primary one, but I think one of the things that we're going to be working on in extension is developing a model for, can a young and beginning farmer come in here and provide this service. One of the things the dairies did was the dairies figured out that they could focus on milking cows and let someone else take care of the replacement heifers. There's going to be some profit potential here for someone else to come in and
Wesley. Wesley. Can't hear you.
They lost connection.
I guess it's changing.
No, they lost connection.
but testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now, Patrick?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm just about done, guys. But so the thing that I'm not sure where you lost me, but I was talking about the idea that size matters. And I remember one of my producers selling cattle on the video, and that same day he sold calves, and he was selling them for 6 months out to weigh 850 pounds, and they brought X price. And I remember the auctioneer saying, I've got some of those too. I want to sell some calves weighing 850 pounds the following June as well. And he said, I got 1,000 head. I want to put those on there. And he sold them, and they brought the same price. And that auctioneer may not have even owned those animals yet, but he knew what he could go and buy those calves at the very next day, put them on feed, put them on grass, whatever, and make them weigh 850 pounds 6 months from now. He essentially was buying and selling on the same market. Unfortunately, those of us that are smaller don't have that advantage to do that. But I will tell you, the more calves that you can put together, the more options that you have to be able to protect your price. So again, I said you're going to get tired of hearing me say this, of what is your system? What is your system on your operation? If this is what the market is telling us, what do we have that everyone else wants? We have grass. I said it's third grade math. You have to be able to do it cheaper than the feedlot can. Well, grass is what gives us that ability to put that gain on cheaper. So what is your system? Do I want to be someone that calves in the spring? Do I want to calve in the fall? Do I want to think about how I change my system to take advantage of this? The only reasons I see to wean and background my calves are two, actually three, but two. Can I do it cheaper than the market can? And oftentimes it's going to take grass to do that. Well, maybe I can't do it cheaper than the market. If I can't, can I add value to them and capture that premium? Those are the two reasons to put gain on your calves. And that because that's either my cost of gain is less than the market or my value of gain is higher because I'm adding value to it from the premiums that I would get. And again, as I've told you, I think it has to be part of your drought mitigation plan. Every farm has a limited amount of grass, labor, and money to be able to utilize. Who gets to utilize it? Is it the cow herd? Is it the stockers, like my calves that I'm going to background, or is it my replacement heifers? And I think it needs to be all three. Most people are so ingrained into this idea that this is the grass I grow each year, so I'm going to have the same number of cows eating 365 days a year. If that's your goal, that's going to be a challenge. All right, that is going to be a challenge. But what if I go in and instead of harvesting all this hay here and feeding it all winter long, what if I go in and say, I'm going to lower that line instead of 100 cows, I'm going to have 75 cows, and then I'm going to background my calves when I have the grass flush. And so my line doesn't become the exact same number all year long. It becomes a lower number when I need it to be lower, but I add mouths in the form of backgrounding my calves when I have that extra grass. Then guess what? If it turns off dry, it's a lot easier for me to put those calves on the trailer and get them to town without having to give up my cow herd. I just do what I normally would have done at that time. All right. So last thing, I'm going to leave you with these numbers. If you think about it, if you have a good acre of grass and you grow 8,000 pounds of forage at about 50% utilization. All right. So you're going to have about 4,000 pounds that your cattle can consume. Again, it can either be consumed by the cows, it can be consumed by the calves, or it can be consumed by the replacement heifers. Let's look at that 600-pound calf eating 3% of his body weight is going to eat 18 pounds a day. A 1,300-pound cow eating 2.6% of her body weight is 34 pounds a day. So the calf can eat grass on that acre for 222 days or a cow for 118 days. And if you think I'm wrong on my math, just think about it. 365 divided by 18, that's about 3 acres per cow, which is what most of us tend to run. All right. If a calf is gaining 1.5 pounds a day gain, and he can do greater than that at times, and he'll do less than that at times. But if he's gaining 1.5 pounds day gain, and we're getting a modest $1 of value of gain, I think you can get better than that. But if I'm getting a modest $1 of value of gain, that's $333 an acre. That cow on those 3 acres says she produces me a 500-pound calf for $1.40 a pound. I'm going to get 85% calf crop because not every cow is going to have me a calf at the end of the year. Some aren't going to breed back. Some are going to lose a calf. That's $192 an acre. So I made not quite twice by the grass going through those calves than I did it going through the cow. And I'll be honest with you, if I had it to do over again, I don't think I'd own a cow. I think I'd just do that calf and then maybe, for about 6 months, 7 months out of the year, I'd do that calf, and the other 5 to 6 months out of the year, I might go sit on the beach. Well, I'm not really a beach person, but I might spend more time with my family taking vacations. We're farmers. We're probably not going to go sit on the beach or take a whole lot more vacations, but it is something to think about, just the dollars that same grass can generate through the calf versus the same dollars that it can generate through the cow. So with that, I'm going to shut up and turn it back to Patrick. I hope I've sparked some interest. I hope you possibly have some questions. As I said, Patrick's going to send this out to you so everyone will have this presentation. Any questions at all, Patrick?
No. No
Okay.
questions.
Well, Well, I'm
So-
going to stay on the meeting. So if you think of
Yeah.
some, just put it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Wesley. I guess we'll. I don't think Andy's made it on yet. He was telling me he had an issue, but he'll be on.
I'm supposed to text him when I'm done so that he can get to the office.
Oh, okay, okay.
Andy
That's
has
good.
a cattleman's board meeting tonight, folks, and so that's why he's not on at this
Yeah.
point. But I'm supposed to text him when I'm done, and he's going to get here by the time Patrick's done.
Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and start. We'll go ahead and start talking about kind of the optimum gain in nutrition and those kind of things. Let me get my PowerPoint up here. Let's see if I can get it shared. So Wesley, can you see that? Looks like a power. Looks like. Wesley.
Yeah, Patrick.
Okay. Can you see that? That looks.
Yep. See it. See it.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. So Wesley kind of went through the economics there, and I'm going to talk basically, and as I asked the question earlier, is stock. I'm going to talk about stock or cattle nutrition and grazing management for optimum gain. I'm going to touch a little bit on stockpile tall fescue. I think when we look at the nutritional value of that, and I actually was in conversation with Tim Schnockenberg related to that. He's been working with some producers testing their stockpile tall fescue. When we show the nutritional value versus what typical hays we've got and things like that, it does a really good. It nutritionally it does really good, and we'll kind of see that here in a little bit, but. Through the winter and stuff, really, that's probably a good resource to utilize when you're when you're grazing stockers, and so and that was the question I asked, and I'll kind of spend a slide on this, but what is our optimum stocker gain? And then basically what I'm going to talk about from that is how do we meet those nutritional needs to support that optimum gain, and talk a little bit about forage management, talk a little bit about supplementation related to that, and additives and things like that. And so this is actually from a slide that Eric Bailey showed during a town hall that we had a couple weeks ago related to gain, and he was talking more about I believe he was talking more about preconditioning cattle, but this comes from a guide sheet put out by Purdue, I believe, and the sites there. But basically, and that's what I was kind of getting at with my question earlier is stocker cattle, you get paid on the gain. And so the gain is the key thing of this operation, and getting the proper gain and getting a gain that's going to pay. And if you're only, if those calves are only, and this was from that article, if those calves are only gaining 1.5 pounds per day, they're using a lot of those nutrients for maintenance. And so really, and we talked a little bit about that in some earlier talks, but we've got maintenance, energy, and then we've got growth. And if we're just those calves are just gaining 1.5 pounds, they're using a lot of those nutrients for maintenance. And so the thing is, we really want to push that gain more, so that they truly are gaining. And so when I look at rations tonight, or when I look at gain, and is 2.5 is really where we need to be, and maybe even 3. And in some times of the year that's not hard to do. Other times of the year, like through the winter and stuff, when our grasses are more dormant and stuff, that may be a little bit harder to do. And that's where we'll, as I go through some rations here, we'll talk about stockpile tall fescue. It's a very good, high quality forage resource, and put up right and managed right can be very beneficial and help keep that cost of gain down. So and so basically I did this last week when we were looking at cows and nutrient requirements, but basically I go to my book from Oklahoma State and it kind of gives me a gain on a. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind is this calf's going to gain a certain weight. And so when we look at, usually when I put a ration together, I look about a 90-day feeding period. And so those calves are going to gain 2.5 pounds. So you really need to develop that ration for the midpoint. And so when we look at this ration, they're consuming about 19.5 pounds of dry matter. When we look at our forages, we need 65% TDN. And as you'll see later, 11% crude protein. Most of our forages that we have that I'll show, we don't have much of an issue with protein. It's usually energy. And then putting the calcium and phosphorus in there, we want to, and actually this is pretty close to a 2-to-1 ratio, and we'll kind of see that here in a little bit as we put that down. And so as I said earlier with the cows and other nutrition talks, key thing here, forage test and determine what the nutritional value of those resources are. And so, and one of the things that I'll show, I've got the stockpile tall fescue in here. And as you notice that compared to fescue hay and this fescue hay, these the stockpile tall fescue was from a producer that Tim Schnockenberg works with. These other values came from Beef Magazine nutrient composition tables. And so, but a lot of our fescue hay sometimes doesn't necessarily test that good, especially on the protein. But you look at, and actually what I'll show here is that later when we look at our hays that we would be feeding, probably depending on how good your fescue hay is, it may not necessarily be enough to get high gain on those calves. And so I mixed in a legume hay, red clover, and there's other hays out there that you can put in there. But when you look at that, a little more protein, a little bit more energy, and then you've kind of got your corn, your soy hulls, and your distillers grains down there. And of course, we've talked about that in the past. Those are going to be mostly energy resources, with distillers grains being high in protein. So that then brings in a little extra protein. Now, when we look at stocker cattle, when we look at those, the main thing we're pushing is energy. And so when you look at those three supplements there, corn, soy hulls, and distillers grains, and this is one of the things that I don't use a lot of soy hulls and rations as much as I used to. Part of the reason is when you look at the total digestible nutrients, or what we would consider energy, it's quite a bit lower than corn and distillers grains. And so with stocker calves, we're trying to push gain, we're trying to push energy, and we want to do it as cheaply as possible. And a lot of times your corn or your distillers, from a price standpoint, is going to beat your soy hulls, depending on how you get them bought. And so that's why when I go through putting these rations together, a lot of times that's what I kind of lend on is corn and distillers grains especially when we're trying to push energy and gain. Now, from a soy hull standpoint, they kind of work their way in there if we've got a pretty low quality forage and we're trying to really kind of substitute that out, and we need to feed a lot more supplement. And I'll talk about later, and I talked about that last week, is negative associative effects, where if we start feeding too much starch, or if we get to the point where we're having to feed too much distillers grains, we can put soy hulls in there and it's better quality than our hay, and trying to substitute it, because it is a very high fiber resource. it's better quality than our hay, and it works pretty good in there for that. But the other thing is with the legume hay in there, I'm not really running into that issue. So, so I'll just kind of spend a slide here on stockpile tall fescue management and a couple of things when we look at grazing stockers, and one of the things, and even cows, one of the things we want to do is hold those cattle off as long as you can. And without going into a lot of depth here, basically the ergovaline levels, which is the toxin that leads to fescue toxicosis, which reduces performance in our stocker calves, those levels go down the longer you wait to graze that. And typically around January, those levels are down to a point where they are not toxic. I mean, they're below, I believe that number is 200 parts per billion. They get below that level, and that's kind of the threshold of where we start seeing toxicity. So if we get below that level, we don't see as much toxicity in our symptoms in our cattle, which means they perform a little bit better. Now, with that said, we can wait too long, and if we get an ice storm, which we can get in that December, January time frame, that can cause deterioration and reduce quality. So you're kind of risking if you wait too long, but it's just one of those things. You kind of have some risk if you wait too long, but you want to try to wait as long as you can. And some people can't wait that long, and that's fine. But realize that if you can wait longer, those levels of ergovaline reduce, so those toxicity levels reduce, and those symptoms reduce as well, and those cattle perform a little bit better on it. Now, the quality is going to go down some, but it doesn't go down that much. And actually, the stockpile tall fescue nutrient values that I'm using came from samples that were taken in January. So, as you can see, that's pretty good quality grass at that time. So, when we graze this stuff, we want to strip graze it, and I've kind of got a picture up here. And basically 1 to 3 days allocation to improve efficiency utilization and forage height and we allocate it based on forage height, and I'll kind of go through that here in a little bit, but that's one thing to think about is with this stuff is 1 to 3 day allocation and basically strip graze it to get the best efficiency of utilization out of it. And so this is kind of what I went through last week when we were talking about cow rations, but this is kind of with our stockpiles, we said about 60% TDN. We need about 65% TDN in that ration. What I did was I put a supplement together that's a 50-50 blend of corn and distillers grains. And as you can see here, that stockpile tall fescue does a pretty good job of meeting that need. We do need a little bit of supplement on a dry matter basis, about just a little over 3 pounds to, and this is a very simple and easy way to set that to determine those numbers of supplement needed. And so now when we look at the hay, on the other hand, we don't have quite as good a TDN in that hay, and so we need a little bit more supplement. Now you're looking at more about 6 pounds on a dry matter basis to hit that target of 65% TDN in there. So now when we look at our ration, does it satisfy our protein needs? And I kind of talked about this last week. When we have the stockpile ration, all of those, the forage itself already hits the need of the protein need, because the requirement's 2.15 pounds. That's already met on the stockpile. So the forage already does that. So when we back up here, as far as our supplement, it might be that, and actually I calculated this out, you may not even need to use a supplement blend. You may just need to use and it's just a little bit more pounds of corn from an energy standpoint to hit that target of energy. And because you don't need any extra protein, or you could do it with DDGs. Again, you wouldn't need any extra protein. And again, that comes back to cost per unit of TDN as far as which one fits in there. You could possibly do that with soy hulls too. Now you're going to have to feed more because when you back up, it's only a 74% TDN versus these other ingredients that are in the 80s and the 90s. So again, you're going to have to feed a little bit more soy hulls. But from a price standpoint, that's something you can work out on your own. And if you've ever got any questions related to that, just let me know and I can help you figure that out. But from that standpoint, from that stockpile, it's got plenty of protein, and it just needs a little bit of boost in energy to hit that 2.5 pound gain. When we look at the hay ration, we need a little bit of supplement from the protein standpoint. And we're also on these calves, we're getting pretty high on the number of supplement. And so we probably want to use a blend there instead of just corn or just, we might be able to use just distillers or just soy hulls, but we're getting pretty high on the, amount that we need to supplement. And so we probably want to use a blend, and probably, given that our two high energy ingredients are corn and distillers, those are probably the two we want to work with there. Basically, the other thing that you want to look at in the ration is, do we have enough calcium and phosphorus in there, and is our ratio right? And in both of these, you need to add a little bit of limestone in order to hit that 2-to-1 ratio. And that I talked about, that's optimum for mineral needs. So the other thing is, and this just goes through how we figure out how much we actually are feeding them. And I'll go through the stockpile here in a little bit because we allocate it a little bit differently. But from a supplement standpoint, you're looking at feeding about 4 pounds of supplement when they're on the stockpile. And that's given that you're wasting 5%. So, and we'll go through a little bit later. You're going to feed a little bit, obviously, to get more energy in those cattle to hit that 2.5 pound of gain. You're going to feed a little bit more when they're on the hay diet because of the lower TDN. But any questions, Wesley, before I move on?
So Todd had asked the question, is the 1.5 pounds per day for maintenance just for winter or all year long?
That's really, I think that's all year long. And so that's basically what it's getting at is, basically what that's getting at is the fact that we really need to be pushing more gain in those cattle, because when you look at your costs, or when you look at how those cattle are gaining, just going 1.5 pounds is just really satisfying as they maintain and grow, versus trying to really put growth on them. And so, yeah, that's year round, not just winter. So that's more of a,
yeah, I had a good example I think I'll put into the chat to help that as well.
yeah, because it kind of goes with price as well, I believe, a little bit. That's anyway, so when we look at our forage height, and so I was talking about forage height earlier, and actually when we go through grazing school, we measure height, and here at the bottom it says, based on what kind of grass is there, you have so many pounds of dry matter per inch, and based on how much you remove that. And so this is kind of a simple way to kind of allocate those cattle. And so basically you've got about 10 inches of height. You want to remove about 6. One of the things, and this is probably not as important with stockpile, but this could be more important with fescue in the growing season, but you want to leave some residual, because if we get if we graze off too much, that's going to limit our that's going to limit our grass growth and our forage intake. Now, with stockpile, this forage is dormant, so it's probably not as important with that. But during the growing season, it is kind of important to leave some extra grass, to leave some extra residual there, so it will continue to grow. But and this is an example, probably more of a growing season example, but the concepts are the same. The numbers might change a little bit when we look at stockpile, but basically you get to the point, you have so many pounds of dry matter per inch, and that's kind of where we're at. We're going to remove that much per acre. And so we talked about grazing efficiency in an earlier slide, and we're going to use daily moves. And so that's about 70% efficiency. And so of that 1,800 pounds that we're actually going to remove, because we're going to remove 6 inches, and for every inch that we remove, that's 300 pounds of dry matter. They're going to be about 70% efficient on that. So that's 1,260 pounds of dry matter per acre. And I just throw in there 50 calves. I mean, you can, how many ever calves you've got, that's fine. But I just throw in there 50 calves. They need about 820 pounds of dry matter they need about 820 pounds of dry matter daily to satisfy that need, or that intake that we're talking about that they need. And so that's about 2/3 of an acre daily of stockpile. And in addition to that, they're going to consume about 200 pounds of supplement daily. So, and the thing about it is, this is math, but most people, once they start doing this and they start allocating, they're going to notice, are they taking too much grass away, or are they not eating enough? And as you kind of watch that, and as you measure that, you'll know, okay, I need to give them a little bit more, or maybe I don't need to give them quite as much. And that's just kind of the art of learning how to allocate that stockpile and kind of utilize it from that standpoint. And so this is kind of a good math problem to figure out how to allocate, but you also need to watch the grass, and you need to watch the cattle and watch the performance. And if they need a little bit more, then you need to give them a little bit more. And if they don't, then you pull them back a little. So that's just kind of a practical way to allocate it. So when we look at the hay side of things, on these calves, we're feeding roughly about 18 pounds. And in here, like last week, we corrected that dry matter to our as fed number, and then we added in our wastage, and I put in about 15% wastage, which is, you would take that number, divide by 85% to get that 15% wastage. And of course, that's something you've got to think about on your own operation, how much you're actually wasting. But that gets to about 18 pounds of hay and about 17.5 pounds of supplement. So based on correction for dry matter and for wastage. And so basically, and I didn't throw any numbers from a cost standpoint, but roughly you're feeding a little, you're obviously got more money in your hay versus letting those cattle graze, and you've got more money in your supplement because you're feeding more. So that's just something to keep in mind. And when we can graze, it's obviously much cheaper from that standpoint versus providing hay and supplement. And a lot of times that forage that they're grazing is actually better quality than what your hay is, and you can kind of see how that helps not having to feed as much supplement and be able to graze a little bit more. So some other things to think about, we kind of brought this up last week with the minerals. We talked about calcium and phosphorus, but from a mineral trace mineral vitamin supplement standpoint, basically provide what they need, keep it in front of them, don't let them run out. you're going to provide trace minerals, make sure they're organic. And the reason why is they're more bioavailable. And the fact is, if you're going to provide it to them, you might as well provide it to them in a source that they're going to utilize better. And that's what that means when I say they're more bioavailable, means they can utilize them better. And they should consume about 4 ounces per day. And the main thing is working with your feed dealer to get that mineral that works for your cattle. One thing, if you're having to feed a lot more of the distiller's grains or those byproducts that are high in phosphorus versus calcium, then you may want to put a mineral out that has a little bit more calcium in it. And you may not necessarily need to put any lime in that mineral. You may be able to satisfy in your supplement. You may need to be able to satisfy that with your mineral. So that's just something to keep in mind. Talked about an ionophore last week, and it is important if you're supplementing because it improves energy efficiency in your cow. But one place that you really see it is in these growing cattle, and improves that gain by 0.2 pounds a gain. And if we're developing replacement heifers, it helps in reproduction there. But basically, if you're supplementing, it's something, and actually with growing cattle, you can use Rumensin or Bovatec, depending on which one. It should be labeled for that, but make sure and check the label as far as those and what you can use them for. But I believe Rumensin, you can use either Rumensin or Bovatec on growing cattle, where on cows, typically we just use Rumensin. So, and I didn't put it in here, but some other additives that you might have with your stocker calves would be antibiotics. And that's just something you're going to have to work with your veterinarian on as far as having that in there. But it might be, depending on, it might be a good thing. It's definitely something good to have in a preconditioning or a preconditioning ration or basically a weaning ration, but maybe something that you want to incorporate in there, and fly control as well. Those are, but the antibiotics, you've got to talk to a vet and get a veterinary feed directive and related to that as well to be able to include that in the ration. So, and then I was talking about earlier when I was talking about corn and that's one thing, negative associative effects in these calves. Their main ration is grass or forage. And so we don't want to do anything that's going to negatively impact the rumen, because that's what, and affect their ability to digest forage. And so we want to try to work on keeping that corn level below 0.5% of their body weight. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying, well, you might be able to, on the stockpile, you might be able to just feed straight corn or distillers. But as we get into that hay, we're going to be feeding a lot more supplement. We're going to be over that 0.5% of their body weight threshold in corn. So we need to put some other ingredients in there to increase the energy, but also not get too much starch in the diet. And that's where soy hulls may fit in as well. If we've gotten high enough level of distillers grains in there, as well as corn, maybe we put a little bit of soy hulls in there to dilute out that hay even more. And that's what this next point's about, is you don't want to have too much of high sulfur byproducts. That being the typical ones we use are corn gluten feed and dried distillers grains. And so no more than 40%. So if we max out our distillers grains and our corn, then sometimes we need to throw in some soy hulls to improve that, increase that energy and dilute out some more of that forage, that lower quality forage. And so then, and nitrates, and I threw this in here, it's probably not as big of an issue in our stocker cattle as it is in our cows. But it's, I mean, if you're feeding some supplements or some hays that might typically be high in that, we probably need to watch that a little bit. It's probably not as big of an issue in our cows, but it is something to keep in mind. And a lot of times that would be probably more of an issue if we're grazing our summer annuals, our millet, our sorghum Sudan grass, and our Johnson grass, or if we're feeding silage to those calves. And like I said last week, silage, a lot of times that it might be high nitrate going into the silage pile, but through the ensiling process, that nitrate level reduces, and so a lot of times it's safe to feed by the time the ensiling process is over. And in a lot of instances, our corn stalks and our milo stalks are going to be too poor quality to feed to our stalkers to push that high amount of gains. So, but especially during the growing season on those summer annuals, that might be something we might need to check from time to time if we're in a drought situation and very hot, and basically we've put plenty of fertilizer on that pasture, and yet those forages aren't really growing too much. So, or if we're feeding some hay that might have come from hot, dry conditions. So in sorghum Sudan grass, pearl millet, or Johnson grass. So with that, I'll entertain any questions or anything. And so Wesley, is there any questions?
I don't see any, Patrick.
Okay. I guess, is Andy on?
Yep, Andy's
Yeah,
on.
I'm on.
Okay. And I need to pull up your talk so that,
Actually, I wound up making it back to where I'm at the computer. So if I can figure out how to do it, I can make it work. Patrick.
okay. And Wesley did put an example there in the chat if you want to look at that. Wesley, do you want to kind of explain that a little bit?
Oh, it's a lot of numbers, but it's just a slide that I've used in my grazing school presentation that a 600-pound steer basically gaining half a pound a day. He's basically gaining nothing. I consider a half a pound a day nothing. Needs 7 pounds of energy to basically gain a half a pound. You give him 1 more pound of energy, and he can now gain a pound. He can basically double his performance. If you go from 7 pounds for maintenance to give him 3 more pounds, so going from only 7 pounds to 10 pounds of energy, now he's capable of gaining 2 pounds a day gain. So just the numbers to me highlight just how much energy it takes for maintenance, and so I think about it. My doctor would encourage me to exercise above my maintenance level, but unfortunately I don't do that very often. So, it takes a lot of energy just for maintenance.
Okay. That makes sense. So Andy, are you on?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure this thing out.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet, Andy.
No.
Okay, weird. Okay, Patrick, it's telling me the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, yeah, you need to promote him, Patrick. I'm sorry.
It should be working now.
Okay. Okay, can you see it now?
Yep, we can see it. Whoops, you got to switch the display settings. Go to duplicate slide.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yep, there you go.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start off I'm talking about kind of vaccination and implants, primarily on the vaccination side this evening. what I'm going to talk about. I apologize, I'm a little bit hoarse at the moment anyway, but so we're going to kind of start off kind of with some simple definitions of where we're really going to start. When we talk about preconditioning, which we talked about that quite a little bit last week, when we talked about weaning management and the like, basically we're talking about retaining the calf crop that's raised at home on the farm and adding value to them through our management practices, as well as the weight gain that comes through those management practices and the time on the farm anyway. Like I say, we talked about that quite a little bit last week for those of you who were able to tune in for that one. And we're going to talk, many of the points are going to be the same this week as what they were last week. We're going to kind of go more in the stalker and backgrounder side this week anyway, which is basically buying somebody else's calves and bringing them home and trying to add value to them is what we're doing. Stalker operations, when we talk about the term stalker operations, we're typically talking about those purchased calves, bringing them home and getting them set up and going through some sort of a forage grazing type of a base type of a system is what how we put the gains on them and the like there. Where backgrounding, on the other hand, is typically done in some sort of a dry lot scenario where we have all the cattle shut up in a smaller area anyway, and bring all of their feedstuffs to them to meet their needs is what we're talking about there. So on that, like I say, with the whole, whichever one of these three you kind of consider yourself under, the whole purpose of doing that is to add value to undervalued type of animals is what we're doing. And as I said last week, roughly 2/3 of that added value is going to come through the weight gains that come on those animals. And so that's probably the most important part. And we always, I mean, if you're going to have gain, well, you're going to have growth that comes along with that, obviously. But one thing that we often forget about, and this is for those of you either on the buying or selling end of feeder calves for that matter, is the compensatory gain type of thing anyway. And it's interesting for our steer feed out that we do for the fall of the year, why we have a little session where all of the steers that get gathered up, why we bring them through and we run them through the sale ring at Joplin Stockyards where we collect all these cattle anyway, and give several different industry personnel the opportunity to kind of put their comments on them. And what a lot of times we look at as being good condition is what not necessarily what cattle buyers look at as being good condition. They like to buy calves that have frame on them, but not a lot of extra flesh on them. And because of that compensatory gain factor there, which basically they're going to add that weight back on quicker than what we can put gains from growth on them, essentially is what we're talking about. And so that's certainly a way to add value if you can catch some of those calves that are a little bit lighter, like I say, that have say for example a 600-pound frame with a 400-pound weight. Why you can put that weight on them pretty quickly is what we're talking about from a compensatory gain standpoint. And then the other ways that we add value through our purchasing in calves obviously come from some kind of risky practices or taking advantage of things that other folks have not done in that calf's history anyway. Things such as weaning. You know, if buy calves that are still balling that were weaned on the trailer basically anyway, why obviously you can get those calves a little bit cheaper, and rightfully so. Those that aren't vaccinated, again, you know, you're taking on the risk basically that somebody else for whatever reasons chose not to accept anyway. And so you've got to ask yourself, is it worth the risk to take the reward of the added value basically anyway there. So like I say, all of those things that come with weaning time, dehorning, castrating, all those type of things that should have been done, you can do those and add that value yourself on those calves once you bought them, is basically what we're talking about there anyway. And then the last one that I put on there is simply increasing numbers. You know, a lot of times if you are willing to take the time to go and sit at a lot of these little sale barns around, while you can buy animals 1, 2, 3 at a time that don't necessarily match up with everything else that they get sold with, but you might be able to put together a good bunch out of those mismatched cattle from other folks' bunch and add value that way as well. And the thing to remember is, though, that all of this comes with risk, and you have to weigh those risks against the potential upside basically. Okay, so let's talk about the health challenge of things. And again, you know, with with all of these animals that we're talking about here, there is the risk, and most of those risks come down to health issues and potential of them to either getting sick or ultimately dying anyway. And so health becomes a pretty big issue anyway. And so obviously a vaccination protocol is going to be a big part of what comes along with getting those animals healthy and keeping them that way. And so we're going to kind of share some thoughts and some potential shortcomings of the vaccinations anyway, and a little bit about some alternative management strategies there to kind of help you out. Not a lot on that, but some things to think about at least anyway. So, excuse me, what you see right here is just what I kind of consider the nuts and bolts of what a good type of an vaccination protocol would look like anyway. Obviously, we've got our 7-way Clostridial, which is going to be what's commonly called the blackleg shot, and we want to make sure that that's a component of our vaccination protocol. And a lot of times along with that, you can get a tetanus shot and pink eye that are included in with your Clostridial if you choose to do that anyway. And that's one of those things you may need to kind of weigh what you need and what you don't need necessarily anyway there, but you might be able to double up on some vaccines there. And then the other thing is our respiratory stuff that we typically talk about. Primarily respiratory viruses is what we're predominantly talking about anyway. And you've got a couple options there. You've got the killed versus modified live alternatives that we've got, and we'll talk about that more in a couple of slides anyway. And then obviously we want to control parasites so that those animals are capable of growing to their best ability there. And this is something that's kind of been added to a lot of folks' preconditioning receiving type of protocol over the last several years is BVDPI testing. So basically what that is that's finding those animals that are persistently infected with bovine viral diarrhea, and may not show any signs or outward symptoms whatsoever of being infected with BVD, but they shed that, and that's where that term persistently infected comes from. They shed the disease for their whole life anyway there. And so we have a simple ear notch type of a test that can be done to evaluate whether those animals are BVD carriers or not anyway. And if you can get that done pretty quickly, why you can pull them out of the herd before they shed BVD to other animals is why we want to do that. And you can do that for a couple of bucks a head even. But I put this in bold letters at the bottom here. You always want to consult a vet because there may or may not be something else that you need to be looking at in your particular situation from year to year, bunch to bunch, and even operation to operation for that matter, kind of off of your specific history and the like anyway. So I would encourage you to find a good veterinarian that deals a lot with stocker and backgrounder type of cattle anyway, to kind of work with and provide you some guidance on that as well. So here's a few more. And again, I put this about consulting the vet on here. A few other bacterial loads that we do have a tendency to run into from time to time anyway. And there are vaccination protocols for them as well, which again, it may or may not be something that you need to look at on your individual operation, but it's worth having the discussion with the vet and see what they think about your risk there on those things in your particular situation anyway. Okay, so let's talk about the killed versus modified live basically anyway. So killed a killed vaccine is exactly like what it sounds like. We have killed antigens in there for the virus or viruses that we're talking that are labeled for bacteria, and oftentimes you'll see both labeled in the same shot basically there anyway. And so like I said, we're talking about a killed product there that is for all practical purposes considered very safe anyway, as opposed to the modified live viral vaccines, and we're just referring to the viral component of those vaccines there. Some of them again may have a killed component that goes back to controlling some of the bacterial loads that we have there anyway, but it is truly a live virus. The modified lives will actually come as a vial. You'll have two vials in the box when you buy it. One will be the sterile solution, and the other will be basically a dry powder that's in there, and you mix the two together to activate the medicine, and then you have to use it within a pretty short order after you've actually activated it then too anyway. So like I said in the beginning, the killed virus is truly what it sounds like. It's an inactivated strain of whatever the bacteria or the viral component that we're trying to vaccinate against there anyway. It's a killed component of that anyway is what it was. It takes a little bit more to be able to get these killed viruses to work, and it's a must to put them through 2 rounds of shots to be able to get full protection of that, and then you're still going to want a booster annually with them anyway. But like I say, we want to make sure we're giving 2 rounds of shots that are 3 to 6 weeks apart, basically there anyway. This mentions 30 days anyway, and that's a good target, but somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks apart there basically, and that gives the animal enough time to develop a response from that first round, and then we hit it with that second round to really as a booster to just kind of make the vaccination hit home is what we're talking about doing there. So this slide here kind of shows just what 1 round of a killed vaccine will do for you. You notice you start out with basically no resistance to our viral load at all here anyway, and then we see kind of a gradual uptick here anyway for about the first week or so, and then it comes on pretty steep here for another week or so and starts kind of falling off until we get out here about to that 30-day point, give or take there anyway. And after that, why we get down to the point where it's really not doing a whole lot as far as effectively controlling against the viral component that it's supposed to be controlling against anymore at that point. Here's what doing that second round for us does. Again, you see the same curve up here in the beginning, but then down here as we start to kind of fall off, why we give it a second round, and so then we just skyrocket up here when we have a good level of disease resistance, and we'll stay above that point, that critical point right here, out until for sure out to about a year anyway, and then if we give it that shot, we climb right back up there again. That's the point of having the booster shots to come along with these killed viruses. Okay, on the live virus side, why? Again, we're using a modified strain of actual live virus, and so we're basically what we're doing is infecting the animals with the viral components that we're giving them the vaccination for in a really light load, so that it can spread throughout the animal anyway. And so that's basically what happens. Like I say, we give it a light load, and so we're essentially affecting at a very low level, or infecting our animals with the virus, so that we can get its immune system built to where it starts building immunity to the virus in its own there anyway. And so this is kind of the same chart looking at the modified live anyway. And again, it's a good idea to give a second booster on the modified lives as well anyway, but it's not as critical as what it is with the killed anyway. You see, it's a little bit steeper curve, meaning that they're gonna get some resistance a little bit earlier than what they will with the killed. And then we come out here, and then this would be about our 30-day point out here. We kind of plateau, level out here for a bit anyway. And if we give them another round right here, why again we shoot off until we come out here to the same to where we need to booster them again out here about a year later anyway. So on the benefit side of the modified lives, obviously, like I say, we get a better response to just 1 shot out of it, like what you see right here anyway. And so again, that second round is very important, but if we wind up getting messed up a little bit there, why it's not completely the end of the world anyway. And we get a whole lot better immune response because we're actually infecting the animal with a live small quantity of the virus that we're trying to build immunity for. And so we get a better immunity response because it's more like when the animal it would be infected on its own anyway. Intranasals, that's a pretty common approach when we go to talking about high risk cattle anyway, to get you over a lot of these BRSV, the respiratory shipping complex type of stuff anyway. Basically, that's just like what it sounds. You take a mist of antigen and it goes in and you squirt it up in the nose. It's kind of like what nasal spray is for people to clean their nose out anyway. Only we put that stuff deep up in those animals' nose and then it grows from there anyway. You will get a quicker response with that than you will an injection. However, the immunity doesn't typically last quite as long as what it does and as what it would from an injection. And most of those intranasal products don't really give you a full viral protection against things like BVD and the like anyway. And so we've got to be real careful about that and make sure that we get that into them through some sort of an injectable on its own too there anyway. One thing I will mention while on these modified lives is you need to read your labels very carefully, because most modified lives, we don't want to give that to suckling calves that come out of cows that are naive to modified live viruses, because we can potentially and inadvertently infect our cow herd through a poor vaccination setup there anyway. And so that's something, on the cow side anyway, I know we're talking about stocker and backgrounder operations on this, but you want to kind of be very careful about that and make sure you read the labels. And again, I would talk to a vet about it and make sure you get everything squared away to where you're not going to inadvertently introduce something by accident into your cow herd that way. So here's kind of in talking with several vets, and I actually got a couple of these slides from Dr. Craig Payne, our state extension beef vet anyway. And like I say, from talking to several vets anyway, a lot of times we've kind of got to a point where we rely a little bit more on the vaccine than what we maybe ought to in a lot of instances, and kind of letting it be a crutch for lack of management in other areas anyway. And so we've got to be kind of careful about that. And basically what we're talking about there primarily is a stress load on those calves in relationship to the vaccination timing and the like, and then kind of even pen spacing. We don't want to put our most susceptible calves right up to those that have the highest load in them at the same time anyway. And we'll talk about that more in a slide or two anyway. And the same thing about not, if we understand how the viral loads work, why in the time of contagiousness there anyway, why we can kind of plan our way through that and get along, and hopefully we can reduce the risk of an outbreak by doing that anyway. So that leads us to this question here: do we just simply vaccinate, or do we want to immunize? Which vaccination is probably our best route to immunization, but we have to be careful about that too anyway. And as I said earlier, animals that are stressed they're not gonna deal with taking vaccinations very well. It's gonna mess with the efficacy of the vaccination, and can potentially, particularly on the modified lives, it can make the animal sicker anyway, because as I said, we're basically infecting those animals is what we're doing anyway, so that they build immunity. And so we can really wind up with a whole lot of potential issues by vaccinating those calves when they're under really big stress loads there anyway. Delayed onset of the protection in previously unvaccinated animals. That's one strategy that has been implemented by some herds. Basically, again, it kind of comes back to holding off until we get out of that major stressful period anyway. And that kind of comes down a lot to management. There's been some research that has shown that it works. However, there's other research that shows that you wind up with more train wrecks too out of it anyway. And so, like I say, that's one of those things that it can be a double-edged sword, and you really need to be careful about that, but it could potentially be a strategy to help you make sure that your vaccines are a little bit more effective anyway. The last one on the list here is the mishandling of vaccines. We want to be careful about how our vaccines are handled, and almost all of them must be refrigerated. And we got to make sure that medicine keeps cool. We got to make sure it stays in a cooler at all times. And even if we're working calves in the heat of the summer, for example, anyway, why it's not a bad idea to fix up some sort of a cooler where your syringes stay inside that cooler, kind of as a cool chamber. That way they stay cool too, because heat and sunlight can deactivate good vaccines pretty quickly and lead us with some issues there anyway. And then again, once you crack a bottle, why you need to make sure you're using it up pretty darn quick too, and it's not sitting around and going back in the refrigerator from spring to fall, for example, and things like that anyway. And so we've got to be careful about that. And you want to try and not poke into those bottles any more than is just necessary too. Most of the stoppers of the rubber stoppers on the top of those bottles, about 20 times is the maximum for one of those. And so buy your medicine in bottles that rightfully fits the number of animals that you're going to work, and use multiple dosage syringes if you possibly can, so you can get more animals out in one dose there as well anyway. Okay, on that guide, why, again, talking about the handling of animals and working them through the working facilities and the like anyway, that is one of those great stressors anyway. And I take this quote, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That came from a movie about a sniper called The Shooter anyway. And that was what that sniper, that was kind of his motto, was slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Meaning if you slow down and take the time to do things right, you'll only do it once, and you'll wind up getting the job done much better that way anyway. And so that's what we're talking about there, is kind of slow down and be calm, and you'll work to get things done right anyway. Getting excited is going to lead to more stress for you and your animals alike there anyway, and increase the likelihood of having some of those respiratory issues, as well as you could potentially be throwing your medicine dollars down the drain because of that too anyway there. And the bruising of carcasses, I talked about that last week, that we want to do what we can to avoid having bruises all over carcasses, because they wind up having to trim that meat off of that carcass, and so it winds up causing a lot of issues within the packing industry that cost a lot of money. And so we've got to be careful about that as well. Okay, so let's kind of talk about BRD, which is we kind of lump all of the respiratory stressors together into what we call the BRD complex anyway. But basically, we've got an incubation period of about 5 days, meaning from the time that they're first exposed to the viral strains until the time they start exhibiting outward symptoms is going to be somewhere around 5 days is what we're going to be. And they will shed that, meaning they'll be contagious for about 15 days then after that. So like I say, we've got to be pretty careful about that. You can use that timeline as a tool to help you plan where you store your cattle in a backgrounding yard particularly. We want to try and keep the numbers of animals in those pens down and to where we don't have any more contact than what we absolutely possibly have anyway. But basically, kind of like we talk about the coronavirus right now, having close contact with aerosolized particles is where a lot of this comes from. So we don't want to have nose-to-nose contact between those that are sick and those that are highly likely to become sick anyway. And the disease is going to replicate itself at a rate of about 4, meaning you're going to have 4 times as many cases tomorrow as you did today is what we want to shoot for there. So here's day 0. All of these stars represent animals within a pen there anyway, and they're all happy at this point. Day 5, we're still pretty happy. Then all of a sudden we break out there on day 5, and one particular animal is going to get sick anyway. So then we go out here to day 10, and by day 10, again, that we go back to that 5 days to before they start showing outward signs. All of a sudden we've got 4 more of that one beginning animal's friends that are going to be sick now. And then we go out here to day 15, and we've got ourselves a mess anyway. We're down to the point where there's not but a couple of them that aren't sick anyway. And then we start kind of after day 15, we'll start getting animals over it, and to where we start going backwards there just a little bit. But then we wind up at day 20, we wind up getting those last couple, they'll wind up being sick by that point anyway. And the first one is finally healthy at that point. So we go out here to day 25 and so on and so forth. And so we've got ourselves basically about a 30-day period in there where we've got some problems. My computer's running slow here right at the moment anyway. So this kind of sums up a little bit what we've talked about over the last several slides anyway. Although vaccines aren't foolproof, meaning they do have their issues about them. Primarily it comes down to our administration of them for the most part anyway. It's still about our best way to be able to reduce the likelihood of having an outbreak in the herd anyway. So certainly keep that in mind and understand that it's worth your while to spend that money anyway. Early disease detection is important. And like I said, like you saw in this last series of slides about how over the period of 30 days, how the virus ran its course through the herd anyway. If we catch those sick animals early and we can pull them out and put them in a sick pen, why potentially we can save ourselves some headaches there from from having other animals get sick too anyway. And then if it's a microbial type of a problem that we're seeing, obviously antibiotics are gonna be our best route to try and kind of control that anyway. Patho mitigation, basically that's altering the timing of it and the exposure to those pathogens anyway. Like I said earlier on, we want to try and minimize the likelihood of a sick animal introducing that to another animal is what it comes down to, which comes down to trying not to commingle, meaning we don't want to have animals from different places in the same pen if we can at all keep that from happening anyway. And we want to, as much as possible, keep those animals from being nose to nose with another pen that is highly contagious too anyway. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about parasite control. Now, probably most of you have read in the popular press or heard somewhere recently over the last several years anyway about how we really need to be careful about trying to avoid issues of resistance to our current deworming products that we've got, because it's going to be a long time before we have anything else that's going to come on the market to be effective there anyway. And so the bottom line, we saw some resistance issues popping up 15 years ago to some less economically relevant, I guess is probably the best way to put it anyway, economically relevant type of parasite loads there anyway. But over the last 5 years, give or take anyway, why Australia has gone to showing a little bit more of a resistance issue anyway, and that's the ones that we deal with primarily the most anyway. And so like I say, if we go to having trouble there, why we're going to get to a point where we don't have any effective tools in preventing parasite load issues anyway. So it's kind of important to talk about the different classes, I guess you'd say, of deworming products that we have here anyway. We've got our macrocyclic lactones, which that's what most of our common deworming products are. Ivomec and the generic ivermectin type of products, they fall under that category. Dectomax does, Epronix and Long Range, they both do, and Cydectin. So that's the vast majority of our common dewormers right there anyway. Then we've got what we call our white dewormers that fall over here in a different class anyway. Things like Safeguard, Panacur, and Valbazin. Those are the ones that are our other more common type of options anyway. And so currently what we talk about as kind of being the best way to go about that is to use two different classes of drugs at the same time anyway, which comes down to using any one of these particular products, whether it be ivermectin or Dectomax, whatever one of them, along with one of these white dewormers, a Safeguard, something like that. And basically what we're doing there is we get the vast majority of them with our primary one, but then the white dewormers are pretty good at flushing out what is left there anyway. And so, like I say, we do a pretty decent job of getting about 99% of the parasites out of the animals by hitting them with both drugs at the same time there anyway. Another thought that's kind of been catching a lot of tread here lately, and they've done a lot of research on it, is the idea of refuge, leaving. So basically with that thought, why we want to leave a certain amount of those animals to where they're untreated, so that we allow them, the untreated animals, and so there won't be any resistance there anyway. And so we allow that particular set of animals that have not developed resistance to the dewormers, we allow them to populate along with those that are resistant anyway. And hopefully we kind of keep ourselves in a point where those that are not resistant will keep ahead of the ones that are anyway. And this last one on here, this is a pretty important one to think about as well anyway. If at all possible, I know it's a little bit more work, but we like to use injectable dewormers as opposed to pour-ons because of the efficacy of them, basically anywhere. The pour-ons, I mean, not to say that if you get them dosed properly, that works for you anyway, but you have to be careful about, particularly in wintertime or cattle with a heavier coat on anyway, is all of that active ingredient going to wind up making its way to the skin where it can be absorbed into the animal? or is it gonna wind up getting hung up in the hair there and that kind of thing. And so, like I say, when you put it in the injectable form and you actually get it under the skin of the animal, well, you know that it's going to work at that point anyway. And there have been a number of studies that have compared name brand versus generic formulations, even with the injectable products for that matter anyway. And the generics just flat don't have the umph to them as what the name brand ones do in a lot of the trials that have been done anyway. And so, like I say, it's pretty easy to get tempted to save yourself quite a little bit of money by going down the road of the generics, but it's a good idea, particularly with higher risk type of cattle anyway, to spend the extra money and go the name brand route. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears here and we're going to talk about growth promoting implants for a second. And I'd be curious, if you don't care, why in the chat stuff down there, tell me whether you use implants in your operation or not anyway. And that's one of those things where we've noticed actually the number of producers that do use implants has gone down over time anyway. And that's, again, we're in the business of growing cattle. And so if we can do something that can make them be more efficient at utilizing the feedstuffs that we put in front of them, why it's going to likely be to our benefit to do that anyway. So basically what we do is it's a hormone implant is what it is, but we take a needle like you see. This is a Ralgro setup here anyway, and this is there's little pellets that are in the wheel type with the Ralgros here anyway, and you administer them, and we want to try and shoot for having that in the middle third of the ear along on the back side there anyway. So you'll actually inject the animal on the back side of the ear toward the outside part of that middle third of the ear. You'll stick your needle in and go down to the inside part of the middle third there, and then pull back on it slightly so you allow enough room for that pellet to fall into the ear there anyway. And that's as simple as it is right there anyway. But again, you get a pretty decent return on your investment by doing that anyway. And so Ralgro and the Synovex products, those are the two that tend to be the most commonly used around here and most commonly available for that point anyway. But anyway, it doesn't really matter what product. You're going to see somewhere around a 10% rate of gain increase there anyway, and 5 to 10% increase in your feed efficiency there. So like I say, that's not a bad way to it's almost the same thing as a free lunch basically is what we're talking about there. But we do want to make sure we're using the right product on the right animals anyway. And that kind of comes down to reading the label on the individual products there. Ralgro, for example, for steers, you can use it from the day they're born until the day they're slaughtered if you choose anyway. Heifers, on the other hand, particularly if you're planning on keeping heifers for breeding purposes, and I'm not a big believer in using implants in heifers that you're going to breed at all, really. Anyway, there are some that are considered safe, but like I say, I'm not a big fan in it for heifers that we're planning on keeping anyway. But it is labeled for heifers from birth up to weaning age there anyway. Synovex, the other one, they've got several different formulations to choose from there. The Synovex S is for steers, and it's a progesterone based and with estradiol along with it there anyway. And you can use it it's intended for calves that are a little bit bigger, basically at weaning time is when you would use it. The Synovex H, it's intended for heifers, and again, use at weaning time there anyway, and it's testosterone and estradiol. And the one for calves can be used in either heifers or steers, and it's even labeled to be safe for replacement heifers, but you can use it as early as 45 days of age on that one there. And so, like I say, that's something to think about for you for not a whole lot of extra cost or effort. Why you can give yourself about a 10% boost on the efficiency of the feeds that you put in front of those animals. And again, like I said earlier, why they are hormone-based products anyway, and you hear a lot in the news about added hormones and causing our daughters to reach puberty early and that kind of thing. And so this is actually from some research that's pretty old now, in all honesty, comparing the amount of estrogenic activity in several different types of foods that we actually eat. Soybean oil, which of course anything that's fried is probably going to have a big component of soybean or some other type of an oil seed type of an oil. And anyway, it's through the roof there anyway. And then we get down here, cabbage again. Cabbage has quite a little bit more than what any sort of beef does for that matter anyway. And then eggs and milk, eggs are pretty significant as well. milk, we're starting to see a drop down here anyway. And if you look, beef from a pregnant cow, basically her own estrogenic compounds there anyway, 636 nanograms per pound. Beef from an implanted cow or implanted steer, for example, anyway, 10 nanograms per pound, and from a non-implanted, 7 nanograms per pound. So basically, that's a very minuscule amount of difference between implanted and non-implanted steers in the amount of estrogenic activity that you see in that actual meat when you look at it anyway. So like I say, that's all blown out of proportion type of stuff anyway, and it's completely safe to use. So kind of some closing thoughts to put on here anyway. Obviously, like I said, we're talking about adding value to animals, and so the rule of thumb with any type of a livestock operation is to buy low and sell high, and that definitely holds true when we're talking about backgrounders. And so like I say, you want to kind of keep that in mind. And I put this picture in here. This is my daughter. This is when she is pretty young, probably about 18 months old, I guess anyway, sitting on my wife's uncle's lap at the sale barn in Buffalo, actually anyway. And he has made his living off of trading cattle and selling cattle as an auctioneer and the like for better than 40 years anyway. And so I put this in here kind of to make you think about learning from folks who have had a lot of experience and kind of mentoring along anyway. And this is a picture of her sitting on my lap at a registered Hereford sale on Saturday, actually anyway, where we went and looked at cattle and she picked out the ones that she wanted, and she had very good taste. I'm gonna tell you, we couldn't bring home any of her top picks, but we did pick one that was pretty close that she liked anyway. But you know, at this point, at 6 years of age, why she can reason with me why she likes an animal, and I'm not saying she's learned everything by a long sight, but like I say, she can reason with me about why or why not to buy an animal because of the things that she learned from being around this even at her young age of 6 years old anyway. So like I say, that's what it comes down to is finding somebody that you can lean on, whether it be somebody who's been in the business of trading cattle for a long time and has a lot of experience with background and the like, or the veterinarian, and obviously lean on them for sure anyway. But have somebody that you can mentor with anyway along the way if you're starting from scratch with this, and know your costs. Again, we're in this to make money. We're trying to add value to these animals. And so you've got to understand where you are from a cost standpoint and see whether you're really making any money or not. And then the risk management, I don't know. I missed out on seeing Wesley's talk tonight, but I would imagine that he had a little bit in there about risk management from an economic side. But the things that we've talked about, that's the risk management from an animal management side. And like I say, whether we really want to take that risk of buying those cattle that haven't had anything done to them and trying to add value that way, or whether we want to spend a little bit more money for cattle that are vaccinated and a little bit more likely to come to us healthy and take that extra risk out of the equation there anyway. And there are times for both, for that matter, I think anyway. And some people are better at doctoring cattle and seeing sick ones and that kind of thing. And if you can do that and you're good at it, why, by all means, take advantage of your skill set and buy those more risky type of cows and add the value and take advantage of somebody else's mistakes there anyway. But like I say, I'll leave those thoughts for you kind of in closing there. If anybody has any questions or final comments, I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about the implants. And then like I say, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer those as well.
Andy, we had somebody said they use Ralgro on their steers, and somebody also used Synovex C on all their calves. So,
okay, that's interesting. Like I say, I think a lot of the kind of producer survey type of research results that I've read recently, there's not as many people doing it as what they once did, and I suppose probably some of that kind of comes back to consumer pushback, maybe anyway, and some of those kind of false assumptions about that we talked about having extra estrogenic compounds in our beef from implanted animals and the like anyway. And some of it comes down to the workload that comes along with it too. And weaning in general isn't as common as what it was at one time as the age of our producers increases and everything too anyway. But like I say, I was just kind of curious what folks were doing out there anyway. Any other questions?
I don't see any more questions. So I guess with no more questions, I want to thank Wesley and Andy for doing these 3 nights. And actually, I found out this week we've got a way to send out the videos. And so I'm going to work on getting that done here at the end of the week. And I'll send out links to each of the videos from the presentations. The first night I didn't record one of the presentations. There were 3 presentations. I forgot to record one, but I'll try to get that done here pretty soon this week, and get those sent out. What I'll end up doing is sending them to the person that did the registrations, and they will send directly to everybody who attended those or registered for those workshops. And so we will work on getting that done. I'll plan on putting an evaluation together tomorrow to send out electronically. So you can fill that out on tonight's workshop, and you can still fill out the evaluations on the other 2 nights workshops, the electronic link for those evaluations. And so again, I want to thank you all for being on tonight and in the last 2 nights. And of course, if you have any questions or anything, you can always contact us. We'll do what we can to help. So again, thank you all for being on, and we'll talk to you later.